Hey Gators, I am hanging out today with Will Miles of Read and Reaction. Will, you guys just dropped your 2024 preview magazine. Gator fans can order this. We're going to talk about how you do that in a little bit, but this is like a work of art. Okay. I have spent so much time reading every page of this. I think it is so well done. How many years have you been doing this?
So this is our third year doing it. It's the second year doing a hard copy, and this year we decided to make it available on Amazon, just to make it easy for everybody to order. So yeah, third year doing this. First year was pretty clunky. Last year I think we got a pretty good handle on it. And this year we're really proud of the product. We think it's a must-have for Gator fans, and hopefully folks that watch your show think so too.
I mean, I honestly think like, hey, you guys need to get into 2 days to July. This will help you get there. And this will kind of help you, I think, understand where we are too, because you know, I think there's a lot of Gator fans that are very divided on where this team is, where this team is headed. You in the beginning kind of told a cautionary tale about, the risks of firing a coach too soon. You talked about Lamar Jackson and Will Muschamp, which I find this very interesting. And once I read it, I remember back when it happened, but it is interesting. Tell a little bit about how Lamar Jackson could have actually been a Gator.
Yeah, so Jackson was a recruit. He had made several visits to Florida. He was actually a Florida lean for an extended period of time, and then he wound up going to Louisville with Bobby Petrino. And afterwards, one of the recruiting services was interviewing him about why he didn't go to Florida, and he said it was because of the uncertainty around Will Muschamp and around Kurt Roper, who was the offensive coordinator as well at the time. And so, really, the uncertainty around Muschamp kept Lamar Jackson from playing for Florida with those 2015 and 2016 Will Muschamp defenses that Jim McElwain was able to ride to at least SEC championship games. So if you'd have had Lamar Jackson winning a Heisman Trophy or at least playing at that level behind or with those defenses, what could Florida have been in 2015 and 2016? And obviously that ties in to DJ Lagway coming in here with Billy Napier from the standpoint of why would you show patience to a coach who's gone 6-7 and 5-7 in his first 2 years, especially if Florida struggles again this year. The point is not to push people in one direction or the other. It's just to say, look, it's one of those things where pretty much to get Lagway in, you're kind of pot committed at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is it better to see him and what he is over the next couple of years? Or is it better to make a change and all of a sudden Lagway's the starting quarterback at Ohio State or at USC or something like that because you made a change at coach? And that's really the thing that administrators have to weigh these days.
Yeah.
You think about Chris Leak back in 2004 and 2005. Urban Meyer gets hired. They get rid of Ron Zook, who's the guy that Leak committed to.
Sure.
But Leak stays in a program that doesn't fit him, ends up winning a national championship, obviously. But I think everybody certainly realizes that it wasn't a perfect fit with Leak. You bring in someone who doesn't jive with Lagway, who's not a great fit with Lagway, and he's got options that somebody like Leak didn't have back in 2004, 2005. And so that was the point, is just to sort of point out that the hazards of making a change are different than they were in 1990 or 2000 or even 2010. And you need to factor those in when you're saying, fire the guy. Like, look,
Right.
If he goes 4-8, I'm probably not going to be one of the guys saying, hold on. But that is a calculus that you've got to make, is that you've got that guy. And if you think he can be as good as Lamar Jackson was, then, maybe some patience is in order.
So, and how, if you're an administrator of UF, do you balance, the making a change too soon and the crowd that says, like, at some point, somebody's got to be allowed to build the program as far out as they think that it needed to go? How do you balance that with the stat that you had in the magazine that only 2 SEC coaches have won an SEC title more than 3 years after first arriving at that program?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question becomes, as an administrator, what are you trying to build? And Florida hasn't even been a bowl team 2 of the last 3 years, right? And so just getting to a point where you're like making bowls consistently and winning 9 or 10 games Right now, I know Gator Nation isn't going to necessarily think that that is acceptable, and I'm not going to tell you that that's acceptable for the program long term. But one of the reasons that Florida's only winning 5 or 6 games a year is because of that turnover. Now, I think you can make an argument that if you had brought in Hugh Freeze a couple years ago, or if you'd have brought in Dan Lanning a couple years ago, maybe you'd be in a better spot. And I am one of those people who sort of thinks that you kind of need to search for that next Saban or next Smart, and turnover every 3 years doesn't kill you, because a new coach can, a new coach can really make a difference when it comes to
Yeah.
recruiting and those sorts of things. So I guess if I'm an administrator, I look at it, I go, who's out there? Is Ryan Day coming to Gainesville? Is Dan Lanning coming to Gainesville? Is somebody who's a real difference maker coming to Gainesville? If it's just going to be a, hey, we're going to go out and get a Jim McElwain type guy,
Right.
then maybe you show more patience. If you have an opportunity to get Ryan Day to come in because he's tired of the criticism at Ohio State, or he wins a championship this year and he's you throw the whole house at him to get him to come down, like whatever the case might be, if you can get one of those elite coaches, I think you make the change, especially if Florida's 3-9, 4-8.
I'll get right back to chatting with Will, but first, I want to give some major love to Melden Law, as they are the official injury law firm partner of the Florida Gators. They have been serving North Central Florida for over 50 years, and they handle personal injury cases consisting of car, truck, motorcycle, pedestrian, dog bite, slip and fall, and more. Consultations for all matters are completely free. You may not need them today, but do me a favor and follow them on social media using the links in the description. I appreciate Melden Law for their support, and I hope that you guys will check them out too.
The
Well,
the
that's
Go
what I
ahead.
want to talk about next. That minimum number of wins for Napier to keep his job. And, I am kind of the mindset that I almost think the eye test matters more than the win-loss record, like how you accumulated that record. But what do you think that minimum number is?
I think it's probably 7. I think 7-5. There's a world where Florida struggles early. Lagway comes in, he's lighting up the world, and then you're sitting there going, I see the path
Mhm.
to a team that can win. And so maybe then you hold on with less wins than that. I would have said last year prettying things up but still losing games would have been acceptable.
Mhm.
This year, I think prettying things up and still losing games is still going to be ugly to a
Yeah.
large portion of the fan base. And honestly, it's going to come down to, is everyone still in alignment behind Napier when it comes to NIL, facilities, all the donations that come into the university? Because let's be honest, the university doesn't make a change at coach until the people who fund all of this stuff say it's time to make a change.
Right.
And so if the coach has relationships with those people, then it becomes a larger activation energy, I guess, to get the guy out. And Napier has built those connections in a way that Dan Mullen did not, and in a way that Jim McElwain did not. So I do think he has more capital within the walls of the people who really make those decisions and fund those decisions. So he'll have maybe a little bit more rope. But look, you can't go 4-8 in Gainesville. It's just not the way it's not the way it works. Especially when you've had a first couple of years. There are only two ways to keep people engaged with a college football team. One is to win games, and the
Mhm.
other is to sell hope.
Right.
And hope is recruiting, hope is Lagway, hope is some progress on the field. And if you're going 4-8 and Lagway hasn't played at all, sorry, it's time to try somebody else. And that's just sort of the way it's going to be.
So that was actually written in my notes, because when we did this last summer, you said the same thing to me, that you can sell wins or you can sell hope. And I have repeated that too many times to count. I always credit you with it because I love it, because that's exactly what you have to do as a head coach. But let's say the university is willing to give him another year. How does UF keep recruits from jumping ship? Because that that's exactly what every team is going to say to those recruits when they go visit other places.
Money. I mean, that's the reality. Is this going to take a lot of dollars?
Yeah.
And there are guys who would have chosen to go to Alabama to play for Nick Saban. Right now, there are guys who will choose to go to Georgia and play for Kirby
Yeah.
Smart.
Yeah.
Probably in situations where, if the money is equal, or maybe even if the money is a little bit less, to go to one of those places through NIL, they'll make that choice because the money on the back end,
Yeah.
in terms of what you're going to get if you go to a Georgia, that if you're a top tier prospect and you actually perform, 3 years from now you're in the NFL.
Right.
And that Smart's going to set you up for that, and he's going to prepare you for that. You could say the same thing about Alabama. You can say the same thing about Ryan Day at Ohio State. For all the criticism of him not beating Michigan, he's putting a boatload of players in the NFL.
Yeah.
So that's how you get a discount when you win.
Mhm.
And if you're not winning, you don't get a discount. You have to overpay. And that's
Yeah.
really going to be that to me is the decision point is, can Florida raise the money to be able to sustain the recruiting that they need? And I'll tell you, the 2025 class right now, most of the valuable players in that class have already committed. So
Yeah.
if you start looking at it, something like 50 or 60% of Bud Davis, Bud Davis on Twitter does a really nice job of doing
Yeah,
this.
it does.
Something like 40 or 50% of all the value really of the recruiting class is already committed. And Florida is like 75th or something overall in that 2025 recruiting class. They got to pick it up and pick it up pretty fast. We'll know by September whether there's any hope in that class. And the idea that you're just going to be able to win 9 games and all of a sudden the floodgates are going to open, maybe given the flips that we saw at the end of,
Sure.
right at early signing day this year, maybe there's a little bit more movement than there has been in the past, but you got to at least have a foundation. And right now the foundation is relatively small for that recruiting class. So it's time to open up the checkbook, either to get a new coach, or it's time to open up the checkbook to make sure you're bringing in the recruits. It's the only way it's going to work.